2018, 1 year before the publication of the Cybersecurity Act, the former EA chair, Ignacio Pina, and myself had the first meeting in Brussels with the senior managers from ENISA. That was Steve Purser and Andreas Mitrakas, in order to discuss about the European Cybersecurity Certification Framework and the development of potential candidate schemes. The reason for starting the cooperation was that the CSA would take recourse to conformity assessment and accreditation according to Regulation 765. At this time, I have to admit, it seems for me almost impossible due to the complexity that ENISA would be able to prepare within 3 to 4 years a candidate scheme which covers a significant range of ICT products, processes, and services. It was indeed a huge challenge. But ENISA established, based on the Cybersecurity Act, several experts groups and invested a lot of resources into this activity, and that with success. Because now, 3 years after the ENISA EA meeting in Brussels, and 2 years after the publication of the Cybersecurity Act, ENISA drafted the candidate EUCC scheme and the guideline for accreditation. And we are happy that this scheme will be presented today to the EA community, but also to representatives from the national cybersecurity certification authorities. These NCCAs play an important role under the Cybersecurity Act, in particular regarding caps involved in assurance level high. Therefore, it will be key to have a good cooperation between the national accreditation bodies and the NCCAs. Therefore, welcome also to the NCCAs and also to the EA recognized stakeholder representatives. Could you please mute your mic? I'm not sure who is. Yeah, thank you. I'm very happy that we have now speakers with us, which are responsible for the EUCC scheme and the guidelines for accreditation of laboratory. That is especially the first speaker, Philip Blott from ENISA. He is lead expert certification at ENISA, chair of the EUCC ad hoc working group, and responsible finally for the EUCC scheme. He will present us this first candidate scheme. We have also 2 experts with us who will inform us about the guidelines on the accreditation of laboratories called ACCREDITATION. This is first Javier Talon, who is technical director at JTSEC, expert consultant on the Common Criteria Standard and other security assurance standards in the field of information technology. And that is Miguel Banon, who is convener of the ISO-ISC Joint Technical Committee Working Group 3, dealing with security evaluation, testing and specification, and he is management board member of the Common Criteria Users Forum. I should note that the draft guidelines for labs and national accreditation bodies have been distributed to the participants of this webinar on last Wednesday. And finally, I'm really glad that Rosalina Ortega from ENAC is with us. She's convener of the EA task force group ENISA, and she represents EA in various ENISA technical groups. Rosalina will make a presentation on the EUCC scheme and its application by national accreditation bodies. Before we start with the first presentation, just a couple of administrative issues. I mentioned already, please mute your mics. If you want to have the floor during the discussion sessions, please raise your hand and you will get the floor. In this case, please unmute your mic, switch on your camera if you want, and say your name and the organization of you are representing. Please be aware that this webinar will be recorded. If you do not want to be visible on the internet or social medias, please switch off your camera. If you have any questions, then I mentioned we will have some time for discussion, but you can also use the chat function, and we try to look at that regularly and then to raise questions mentioned in the chat also during the discussion sessions. And I'm inviting now Philip Blott from ENISA for the first presentation. Philip, the floor is yours.
Hi, sorry. Hi, everyone. Hi, Andreas. I hope you can hear me. Yes.
Yes.
Cool. Many thanks for the kind words. I'm really happy to have this opportunity to discuss with accreditation colleagues and to have this organization that represent one of the key players into the certification framework to hear from us, from ENISA, what we already have in place in terms of schemes and also in terms of accreditation requirements or guidance we may have towards some of the categories of the CAP players, and I will explain that in a moment. I want also to thank the participation of EA representatives into the work of ENISA. As you mentioned, Andreas, this has been a very nice initiative to have you from the very beginning into our discussion so that we can set the bar and share a common objective also with the NCCAs and the experts at the same time, and not discover at the end that we may have missed something. The invitation you have raised also to have not only the NABs but also NCCAs and the stakeholders is also very appreciated. I would like to insist on that. So as you said, I will have Javier and Miguel to support me, and I used also the opportunity because even if there is an agreed program, we always like surprises. I also invited Eric Vétiard, who is in charge to design the second scheme, EUCS, which targets cloud services, also to have the possibility to give some indications of where he stands currently, and also this is interference with accreditation matters. So we probably use the possibility to have his talk a couple of minutes before I close my presentation at quarter to 11, and before we engage into the questions, if that's okay for you. So now, so I'm again just a short introduction for myself. So I'm Philippe Blott. I joined ENISA in November 2019. I previously had been working at ANSSI, the French Cybersecurity Authority, into a division related to products and services. So, which had the following activities: certification of products and qualification of services, approval of products which are designated to protect sensitive or classified information for national, EU, NATO business, export controls, relation with industry. So, and of course, the relation with the NABs, at least the national one, and the relation with the ecosystem, the CABs has always been in my sphere of willingness to develop this important activity, which also serves into the market, and I will insist on that as well. So let's start to try and share. Tu entends du bruit aussi, Eric? Sorry.
Sorry, Philip, please.
Yeah, no worries. So do you see my screen?
Yes, we do. Could you put it on presentation mode? Yes. Thank you.
Okay. So I will present the candidate scheme as a global overview of the scheme, and then I will present some highlights of the scheme in order to indicate what might be a difference. What might be the differences as compared to existing SOGAS activities we already have in place for many years. I will also develop ongoing activities we have, especially regarding guidance and pilots. Here are some elements of agenda. So we started even before I joined ENISA. So on July 19, there was a request received by ENISA from the Commission to put in place to develop a candidate scheme. So this is the general process. ENISA receives from the Commission a request to develop a scheme. This request now was established even before there was the vision, which will be made available as a global vision into a union rolling work program. This is a document that is under discussion still under the ACCREDITATION, which is a community of stakeholders on cybersecurity certification, and this union rolling work program will give a vision of the schemes to be developed, and next to come certification schemes requests for ENISA should more or less be aligned with this document, which will be published anytime. So based on the request, the general process is that we set up an ad hoc working group. The ad hoc working group is set up based on a call we do on our internet website, and we invite people to join. We invite experts to join, be them from the developer side, so with the people that develop security offers that relate to the scheme to be developed, but also consumer of certified solutions, and also the NABs, potentially, also the CABs. And we also wanted from the very beginning to have the member states associated to the development of the scheme. So we also invited, and that's in addition to the selection procedure we had, for which we designated 20 representatives from the previous stakeholders I was mentioning. We also invited the member state to join, and they were designated by the relevant authorities. So in total, we ended with a group that is more or less composed of 35 people. The ad hoc working group, so chaired by ENISA, delivered a first version of the scheme in July 2020 that was published for review. So we parallelized a public review, SCCG and ACCG review. Based on this review, we delivered a second version of the scheme, version 1.1, that was delivered to the ECCG. So ECCG is the member states representation to for supporting the development of the scheme, and the ECCG is supposed to give its opinion on the candidate scheme before ENISA sends officially the scheme to the Commission, and the Commission starts engaging into the development of an implementing act. So the ECCG opinion was received, and based on that, we delivered version 1.1.1 of the scheme to the Commission. Version 1.1.1 was just a small cosmetic review of the document, we all, by the way, embedded some updated version of the annexes that are still developed by the SOGAES committee. The Commission, based on the candidate scheme, started to develop an implementing act, and the draft of the implementing act was shared with the ECCG members, submitted to comments, and the comments received were also commented by ENISA. So we responded to the comments, and now everything is in the hands of the Commission for them to develop an implementing act. In parallel to these more legal activities, we engage into guidance development. Guidance is key. Guidance will go into the detail of what a candidate scheme cannot go, and will allow to provide harmonized interpretations of the requirements. And I will elaborate on that. But before I elaborate on that, I want to display some information on what we are talking. So the EUCC scheme, what is it? It's a scheme for ICT products. So you remember that the Cybersecurity Act covers the certification of ICT products, services, or processes. Here we are dealing with ICT products. And we have already the common criteria, so the two standards I'm mentioning here, that are the foundation for this scheme. So you have multiple examples of certified products, and in your wallet you probably have a banking card with a chip that was certified and an app that was certified. You have ID cards or passport with chips that have been so this scheme is based on the goal of this scheme is to focus on how to evaluate in a harmonized way. The what to evaluate is left to the relevant stakeholders. And we will not tell at ENISA level what should be a good firewall. The people that want to procure a good firewall, they will have to define their requirements using the common criteria to select which products have been potentially certified against these sectorial or technical requirements. And in general, these what to evaluate, the protection profiles that are defined to support this requirements expression, are developed by the communities, either at regulatory domains or under standardization organization. And here I give some example. We have the EDAS protection profile, which standardizes security requirements for cryptographic modules to be used as qualified signature creation devices. So it's under EDAS regulation. We have automotive theme specific TPM, which have been designed by the automotive community. We have the machine readable travel documents, SAC, supplemental access control, sorry for the long title, that has been developed for the authority that deals with passports. We have also collaborative protection profiles that have been developed by community under the CCRA. So these expressions of the requirements are not in the scheme, but what is available in the scheme is the possibility to certify these protection profiles to make sure that they are in line with the above mentioned standards, the common criteria. The EUCC, when we received the request at ENISA, there was a clear definition of the expectation, and it aims to serve as a successor to the existing schemes operating under the SOGAES MRA. And you will find here a link to the SOGAES MRA. And we wanted to take advantage of the existing practices of this MRA. So we address all common criteria levels, and that goes from lower levels to higher levels. And for the higher levels, the community of the SOGAES has already defined some strong material for the technical domains, and I will elaborate also on that later. It's a full third-party scheme, which does not allow for self-assessment, and it has strong requirements for the CABs acting, especially at higher levels, including peer assessment. The SOGAES MRA is a recognition arrangement between some of the EU member states that deals with certification, and that's been in place for many years. The Cybersecurity Act added many improvements as compared to the situation that was available with the SOGAES MRA. In particular, the CSA asked for assurance continuity of the certificates in order to make sure that certified products would be observed by the relevant bodies, the developers, CABs, and so in terms of whether they would still meet the security requirements they had been certified against. So there are new activities that are being introduced according to the CSA into the scheme, which relate to monitoring and handling of non-compliances and non-conformities, and also vulnerability handling and disclosure. In order to ease the adoption of the possibility to update a product in a simple or more simple way as compared to the full reevaluation of a product, we also introduced a patch management mechanism that can be part of the certification. The scheme is designed to address the requirement of the Cybersecurity Act. I hope you are familiar with the different articles of the Cybersecurity Act, but here I rephrase some of them. There is one article that defines security objective of certification scheme. So what a scheme in terms of what to certify it against should be targeted. And in the candidate scheme, we provided a mapping between the security objective of Article 51 towards the criteria of the common the relevant functional and assurance requirements of the common criteria. This allows for a vendor in particular, or a developer of solution, but also a user of certificates, to see how well a product can solve the security objective as expressed in Article 51. Article 52 defines the assurance level, and therefore we working for a comparison between the assurance level of the Cybersecurity Act and the common criteria, and I will elaborate on that because it's an important part. Article 54 establishes the elements of a certification scheme and expresses in letters A to V what a scheme should contain. We followed Article 54 for the design of the scheme, and the scheme has a core part which addresses all elements requested by Article 54. So the core part of the scheme is about 1/3 of the document. I hope you had the chance to take a look at the candidate scheme. If not, please do so after the presentation. The document is about 300 pages, and 1/3 is dedicated to the core part. This core part is then covering Article 54, and it includes not only requirements but also background information. Background information is there to justify or explain why we went into the different requirements. In addition to the core part elements requested by Article 54, we also provided a section on additional elements to the scheme. So the Article 54 allows for additional elements, and we use that to introduce the possibility to certify protection profiles. As I said before, protection profiles are not products. They are specifications that are approved or agreed, defined by a community, and we wanted to make sure that the possibility which is offered currently by the SOC-IS to certify these specifications, to make sure that they are in line with the criteria of evaluation and certification, was still offered. And this possibility this possibility will also be potentially used for higher domains where no technical domain exists. We also provided recommendations from the ad hoc working group, both on transition from the SOC-IS and future maintenance of the scheme. In addition to these core part, additional elements and recommendations, we provided annexes for mandatory application. And here we mostly copy-pasted the existing mandatory documents that apply for SOC-IS certificates. We added, where necessary, new elements, and I'm thinking about elements that relate to patch management, which is not yet or was not yet covered by the SOC-IS community, and also we elaborated on peer assessment. We will provide guidance in addition, and this will be available through the ENISA website dedicated to certification. Some highlights on mapping. The common criteria, I'm sorry to go into technical details, but the common criteria has multiple, the common criteria, are composed of functional requirements and assurance requirements. Functional requirements are, for example, related to authentication or protection of data during transfer, or audits related to operation at the product level. Assurance requirements are related to what an evaluator, assessor of the product shall perform to test the product, and describes also the evidence that the developer shall provide to support that testing activity. Among the assurance elements, there is one category which has particular interest as compared to the CSA definition of the assurance level, which is the EVA-VAN category. The EVA-VAN defines the criteria of robustness a product has and is assessed against. And for example, it indicates for a particular level how difficult it was for the testing laboratory to set up an attack, to design an attack, and to apply an attack on the product. How difficult it was because it necessitates access to one or many samples of the product. It necessitates access to detailed information on the product or not. It necessitates equipment that is on the shelf, everywhere accessible or bespoke, and it necessitates skills that are common or that are very particular. So the common criteria has a scale from 1 to 5 for these EVA-VAN levels. And based on the long history of the common criteria and on our understanding of the Cybersecurity Act, we decided to go for the following mapping. EVA-VAN 1 and 2 map to assurance level substantial, and EVA-VAN 3 to 5 map to the assurance level high. In terms of security, it has a meaning, but it has also a meaning in terms of market and market players. Currently, SOGAE's activities are mostly run for CB, for certification body activities, by member states or national bodies, because it's an international scheme. So if you refer to SOGAES, it's mostly member states agencies, and if you think international, it's most approximately the same. So the CB in charge to certify according to the common criteria today are mostly national authority, national agencies. Tomorrow, with the Cybersecurity Act and this delineation between the levels substantial and high, commercial cabs will be now in the loop, meaning that certification activities will no more for this substantial level be handled by the national bodies. Of course, they will be supervised, but they will not be they will be not handled. In terms of actors, we have two categories of actors. We have the certification bodies and the testing laboratories. The testing laboratories that are in place today, they are mostly private entities, commercial bodies, and the impact potentially on these entities is different because they have been acting always as commercial bodies and private bodies, so they will continue most likely to act as before. The main change will be for the certification body, but it's important to note. The cabs that have that will play into for the EUCCs, that will act for the EUCC, they shall be accredited. I mentioned two categories of actors. We have the certification bodies and the testing laboratories. The CBs, they will have to be accredited against 17065. The ITSEF, they will have to be accredited against 7025. In addition to their accreditation, the CSA introduces the possibility to ask for more, and if you ask for more, there shall be a dedicated process to authorize the CABs to operate. For the EUCC, we decided to ask for specific requirements for the authorization of CABs to operate at level high. On the general principle that accreditation will be key for the selection of the appropriate CABs, we wanted to harmonize the interpretation of the standards. This is something we will, of course, develop more this morning, but I want to insist on the fact that the goal of this activity related to certification is key. It will support lots of regulation to come. It will enhance the level of confidence that user will have into IT. And therefore, we want to make sure that all players in this field of certification dispose of the same rules and have the same interpretation of the standards. Therefore, we engage with the other group and EA on the development of harmonized interpretation as before or now. Interpretation are national, at national level, and they are not harmonized. One other element of the EUCC scheme is that we are developing a website dedicated to cybersecurity certification that will not only disclose the scheme and associated documentation and guidance, but also the certificates that are issued by the different certification bodies and related information on the status of these certificates. So what you have to understand is that the EU certification scheme is not a scheme that is operated by ENISA. It's defined by ENISA as a candidate scheme and then transformed into an implementing act by the Commission. And then it is applied by the member states that will either act as CBs for the level high or supervise the private CABs that will operate for level substantial or basic. But ENISA will not certify. ENISA will gather the certificates into one single website so that the users of the certificates, they have an easy access to what has been certified and what is the status of these certificates. We will offer on this website some search engines or criteria for research, and we worked on a taxonomy in order to ease the research by a potential user of certificates based on criteria would be their sectorial. So I would like to have an equipment that has been certified to meet some criteria related to automotive, as I was mentioning before, and we will have categories of products based on technologies, and also we will have another third layer which will indicate whether the products are to be composed with, for example, libraries or of certified software solutions. In addition to this website activity that will allow to display all certificates, we are advocating for a label to support the communication on the certificates. We provided into the EUCC scheme some provisions for the establishment of such a label. And we are working currently on the development of such a label, a study, not on development directly, but on a study as how such a label could be set up to promote certification according to the Cybersecurity Act. And for example, we are in this study, we are dealing with should there be a label that only covers the EUCC or is targeting all schemes that will be developed under the Cybersecurity Act. What kind of information is displayed into the label? What kind of elements are accessible when you make an association between the label and the ENISA website, and so on. So this is an ongoing study, and we will probably conclude we will conclude the study by the end of this year. As I said earlier, we introduced in accordance with the Cybersecurity Act, new elements as compared to the SOGIS related to monitoring compliance. And this was an important part of the discussions, which goal we wanted to have. Here I reflect what we have in the scheme, and the goal here, we selected three main targets. We wanted to detect non-compliance into the application by a manufacturer or provider of the rules and obligation related to a certificate that has been issued on their ICT product. So if a developer has obligations related to a certificate, we want to make sure that we monitor that and we detect issues and have the possibility to correct. We have also non-compliance into the conditions under which certification takes place, and which are not related to an individual ICT product. So it might be the case where we discovered that an ITSF missed something, not on one individual product, but on potentially multiple products which would be associated to a gap into either the accreditation or the authorization related to this testing lab. We wanted also to handle the potential non-conformities of individual certified products with their security requirements, which might refer to either a change in the threat environment after the issuance of the certificate or vulnerability identified and related to the products. This is all defined in the scheme, and I will not go into the very details here because it's not the goal of this session. You can have all details when reading the scheme. But as a general measure, we wanted to have monitoring consisting of preventing measures, and we introduced, therefore, especially for the first non-compliance criteria, commitments from the developer, so that we want to make sure that when they apply, they already know in advance what would be their obligations. We will have detection activities, which might, for example, be associated with market surveillance. And we also define consequences with associated timelines on the CAPS activities and or the certificate. This is all detailed in the candidate scheme. And again, I invite you to read that document. We also introduced into the EUCC scheme a general process on handling vulnerabilities and also dealing with disclosure. Here we selected 2 standards, and we also provided some more specific elements that relate to timelines, but also we added requirements to make sure that the developer and deployed remediation on the vulnerabilities would not introduce new vulnerabilities. So we wanted to make sure that the third party involved into the assessment of the product would have the necessary goal and material to reassess probably that there would be non-regression as compared to the security of the product when new features were introduced. In order to ease the updates on the product, we also introduced a non-monetary patch management mechanism. We used 2 tracks for that. One is an ISO track and the other is an EUCC. So working group 1, EUCC is a group that is supporting the SOGAS activities. So we used this approach, this brand new approach, as to define conditions for the CAP to partially certify some of the elements of patch management during the certification of a product, so that the application of a patch would be after a correction easier. This is also well detailed into the scheme. It's a complicated. It's not a complicated area. It's an important one, but this has implication of the certification process as compared to today, and it's detailed in the scheme. We wanted also to introduce the possibility to use a patch management as a fast track approach to handle functional changes into our certified products. The candidate EUCC scheme also defines conditions for mutual recognition with third country. And these conditions may serve as a basis for future mutual recognition arrangements or agreements. However, the responsibility to establish such MRAs or to define conditions under which the current MRA can continue, this responsibility is not on ENISA, and this is a role for the Commission based on the request by the member states to do so. So this is, we can define the conditions only. Ongoing activities. So the full candidate scheme is already 300 pages, as I said earlier. So 1/3, 100 pages, the core requirements, and the 2 additional 100 pages relate to mandatory annexes. So the annexes that go into the details. As an example, and to let you know, the SOGAS community that has been acting for numerous years, they have, for example, defined specific requirements and that are applicable for technical domains. Technical domains have been defined as technical areas, for example, smart cards, where the community approves to establish some harmonized guidelines for the developers to comply with and for the evaluation facilities, the testing labs, to comply with. For example, there are requirements on the security of the sites that are used to develop, produce the products. These elements are into the annex because they are for mandatory application if you want to have a chip that is targeting a high level to be certified. You also have requirements that apply for the ITSEF, so the testing laboratories. For the same type of products, for example, the smart cars, there is an annex that will describe the specific evaluation activities that a testing lab will have to perform on this type of equipments, what type of testing facilities in terms of equipment they shall use, what kind of attacks they shall consider, and there is a predefined set of measurement of what shall be the result of vulnerability analysis. So this is an important material that has been in place and used for many years that is allowing the mutual recognition of the certificates among the SOGAS community. So we wanted to keep that important material. So this was just a mention on the annexes. The document that has been delivered to the Commission is mostly composed of the shalls, the mandatory requirements. And of course, when it comes to mandatory requirements, they may be interpretations or guidance related to how to understand the requirements. And therefore, in anticipation of the approval of a scheme in terms of the adoption of an implementing act, we wanted to make sure that at least some of the element of guidance that would be useful to set up the new scheme would be available for different stakeholders. So we started to work on the following items: harmonized interpretations of 1725 for the accreditation of the ITSEFs, guidance on the manufacturer's commitments, because I mentioned that as an important way to be in a position to prevent issues and to that would be part of the non-compliance monitoring. How to reuse existing SOGAS certificates in order to establish EUCC certificates. This is key here. SOGAS certificates that are in place are important elements for the security of many systems. The EUCC is an evolution of the SOGAS. It's introducing new features, but we want to make sure that there is a smooth transition. We want to avoid a situation where there would be a disruption of certification service based on the fact that people would hesitate engaging now into SOGAS certification because they want to wait for the EUCC to be available. So we have developed some guidance in order to ease the transition between the two types of certificates. We developed also, as mentioned, a taxonomy of ICT products so that we could ease on the ENISA website dedicated to certification the search for the products that are adapted to specific requirements. We also introduce into the candidate scheme the need to develop guidance for the delivery and publication in due times of certificates and their updates. Of course, if we gather all certificates on the ENISA website, it's important to make sure that we have the interface in place for the CBs and national authorities to deliver the certificates and in due time, and also to update the information based on the evolution of the status of the certificates. We also want to make sure that we ensure the security of information for all the workflows associated with certification activities. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, we have some already existing requirements for the higher level on the developers for their sites. But we must make sure that these requirements maybe not at the same level of expectation, maybe at a lower one, but that there are also requirements that are available for lower levels for the developers, but also for the CAPs, for the CBs or ITSEFs, and also so that the community will, in a harmonized way, protect the information related to certification activities. Be there the information that is related to intellectual property of the developer or the outcome of the certification report, or the technical assessment that the ITSEF has done, which indicates the level of the attacks that the product may face. We also will provide in the future checklists to support peer assessments. So there are multiple examples in the candidate scheme of areas where ENISA thought there was a need to dig a little bit further into interpretations or guidance. Maybe we will go for more, but at least we have established a list, and here is just a sample of that. In order to, as I said earlier in the planning, meanwhile, the Commission engaged into the development of an implementing act, we continued the activity with the ad hoc working group and started to develop the guidance. We also used additional experts in the development into these elements. Here is the 6 elements we already wanted to cover in the first phase: accreditation, transition, taxonomy, security of information, developer commitments, and application form. I have added here one which is not in the previous list, but which is also important. As I mentioned earlier, there is a big experience that has been gained on evaluation at higher levels, VAN 4 and 5 for technical domains, so smart cards or HSMs and this kind of equipments. VAN 3 has been defined as the first level of level high according to the CSA, and currently there were until now no harmonized requirements that would apply on the testing facilities, on the labs, as to perform VAN 3 evaluation in a harmonized way. Even though VAN 3 has been in place for many years and has been used largely for the assessment of software equipments, software solutions that also protect sensitive information into EU networks. So we wanted to also cover the gap that was introduced, that was in place. So we work on that, and we have very promising results here. Pilots. Pilots is key. Eric will present in a couple of minutes some elements of his scheme. Launched pilots for the EUCC on the cloud, and the goal was to assess whether the requirements that were set for the scheme or some elements of interpretations for the requirements were someone could understand them, whether they were appropriate, whether the application would fill really the requirements. And we want to go the same way. We want to make sure that the guidance that I was mentioning earlier makes good sense, and that the interpretations or the elements we provide into this guidance is applicable, is not ambiguous, is promising in terms of added value in terms of cybersecurity level of the ICT products and so on. So in order to play with these requirements, we have called for projects to run pilots. The organization was that was put in place was that we would use the ad hoc working group participants to propose topics that they would like to experiment, meaning that the outcome would be a kind of report of lesson learned, but never a certificate or an accreditation or whatever. It would be just an assessment whether the guidance was good enough or whether there would be required amendments, what would be the associated costs and efforts associated to the use of such a requirement, but not a decision on the ICT products or on the CB or on an ITSEP or so on. The ad hoc working group members proposed some pilots, and we have 6 projects that will be run from now on till the end of the year, or maybe a little bit beyond when it comes to some scenarios, but mostly the interest was on the 3 following topics: accreditation of ITSEFs, transition from SOGAS certificates into EUCC certificates with the same certified product. So as is, you take a product that has been certified and you want to see what are the additional requirements and how easy or difficult it is to put in place some monitoring activities at the developer side or at the CAB side. And evaluation of ICT products at a substantial level. The last one is interesting. Not that the other ones are not, but the last one is interesting because it is addressing an area where we will have new CABs, not the national CBs, but private CBs operating, and we want to analyze how we would go for that. So these pilots are under preparation. As I said, they will provide feedback to the ad hoc working group and to propose potentially amendments. And we will also maybe provide you feedback, not maybe, but if you're willing to, we will provide feedback on the first item, which is related to the accreditation of ITSEFs. This concludes my presentation, and we will go after at 1:45 in a couple of minutes to questions, but I wanted to offer Eric the floor for a short update on the EUCS. Please, Eric.
Thank you, Philippe. So just want to say a few words. The work on the certification of cloud services started a few months after the work on common criteria. The key difference is that while EUCC is based on an existing SOGAS ecosystem, EUCS is a new scheme, which is loosely inspired from existing assessment schemes in various member states, but there are a lot of new questions about to be raised. So, in particular, in the EUCS, we are certifying a full service where traditional IT security certification typically focuses on management systems. So the scheme also covers the 3 assurance levels defined by the Cybersecurity Act. So we have developed a set of requirements on security controls that cover these 3 levels. We have also developed a specific methodology which drove mostly from the ISO 17000 family of standards, but also from the ISAE family of standards that is used by public auditors. So from this methodology, we are currently deriving a dedicated set of requirements for conformity assessment bodies based on ISO ASC 17065 that should be used as a basis for accreditation. So in terms of where we stand, we have a new version of the scheme that will be delivered by the end of this year for opinion by the national authorities in the ECCG. However, the work on the requirements for CAPS is still under progress. It will be transferred in the coming weeks or months to Sensen-Annex JTC 13 Working Group 3 for adoption as a technical specification. So the consequence is that we would be delighted to have representatives of the EA communities or the NABs contribute to the finalization of that document in JTC 13. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, thanks a lot to Philip, but also to Eric. So to give us a first introduction to the next candidate scheme, the EUCS. I have not yet discussed that with ENISA and especially with Eric, but of course we have planned another webinar if Eric agrees with that, where we then can present more in detail to our members and the NCCS, to the community, also the EUCS scheme. But thanks a lot for the first information about this very, very important activity. So thank you to you, Eric. Continue now with the guidelines on the accreditation of laboratories. It was mentioned already in the presentation from Philip. And Philip will start with this topic, and then we will continue with 2 presentations, one from Javier and one from Miguel. But first, Philip, please.
Okay, thanks to be back for that. Here's the presentation again, and let's switch to presentation mode. Good. So the second part goes more to the point of the cooperation between our 2 communities. So we want to tackle here what we have produced on guidelines for the accreditation of the labs. So again, some background information. I'm sorry for the repetition, but sometimes it's good to repeat some elements, which are because I feel that this is important that you understand the key points of the changes associated to the transition between the SOGIAS activities and the EUCC. So the mapping again will allow private CAPs to operate. Okay, the notification of the CAPs, which will be the responsibility of the National Cybersecurity Certification Authorities, the NCCAs, will be based for the substantial level solely on the accreditation. Okay, that's a big move. That's a big move for the national authorities, because for the moment, even if there is a strong history based on the accreditation of the CABs, be there the ITSFs or the CBs, even if the CBs, this accreditation was not mandatory under the SOGAS, but whatever, there was always an additional layer of the national authorities, which is called licensing, to overview some additional points on the capabilities of the ITSFs. So the fact that we will rely on accreditation for this substantial level is a main difference as compared to the current situation. So that's why it's really important that everyone in the community, and I thank you, Andreas, for setting that meeting that allows both communities to be all together so that they can share the same views. So this accreditation is really a key element of the notification of the CABs, and in cybersecurity, that's a brand new element for the consideration of the NCCAs. For the level high, we will have authorization on top of the accreditation. The one information I want to highlight here, and it's detailed in the scheme, so you can dig for it in the scheme, is the delineation between accreditation and authorization. It is foreseen that the separation between accreditation and authorization will be based on the fact that in addition to the accreditation, the NCCA will review the CB assessment that their related ITSFs are capable to perform penetration testing for assurance components VAN 3 and higher. And it is important to mention here that it's according to methodology that are not in the public domain nor published standards. So that's therefore the fact that we provide some elements into already the candidate scheme with the mentioned annexes that I was referring to. And we are developing currently for the VAN 3 level some harmonized interpretation of the capability of the ITSFs to perform such activities. But it's something that was not available yet and which will become available with time, over time. And the second item where there will be additional review is the protection of security of information, probably to stricter requirements than the ones that may apply for the accreditation of the CABs. And this is again something that is under definition for the different workflows that may apply during certification. So here the strategy we developed regarding the accreditation. So based on my national experience, where at ANSI we used to have the ITSF accredited, and we established with COFRAC some national interpretations of 1725 for the accreditation of the CABs, the ITSFs. Based on this national experience and the fact that there were also other members, someone should switch off the mic. Okay. Based on national experience and the fact that other member states that were acting on the SOGAS had also provided established national interpretations of 1725 for the accreditation of the ITSF, we decided to go for that in the first glance. Then we wanted to have that in place for the substantial level, so up to VAN 2. The second element we want to elaborate based on that experience is the requirements or the interpretation for the accreditation of the CBs for the same level. Javier and Miguel, they indicate this is something that is easy to handle based on the experience gained on the ITSF. So I will trust them on that, and I hope this will be the case. And here we have potentially a little bit less of experience because there was no obligation under the SOGA-IS to go for the accreditation of the CB. So it's something that is not always common in all the participants to the SOGA-IS MRA. We will continue to develop requirements for accreditation for ITSF that will operate at level high, so VAN 3 and above, and we will see whether we have more requirements for the NAPs for the accreditation of the ITSF. And we again will go do the same for the CBs. You may ask why we did not combine all requirements within a single document, which would be for camps. This is for the EUCC scheme, and which might be a different case for the EUCS, because there is an historical delineation between the ITSF activities and the CB activities. So we wanted, again, as a smooth transition enabler, to make sure that we have the possibility to move from an accreditation of an ITSF according to today's practices into tomorrow's practices in a smooth way, and the same for CBs. Of course, if it happens in the future that the same entity operates both ITSF and CB activities as as a company, and can benefit from a unique accreditation of according to 7065 under the scheme, which is not foreseen at the moment, but we don't know. We have version 1 of the scheme, we will have version 1 of the implementing act, and we will update where necessary. We can combine things into single documents, but for the moment we still work on separate documents. I don't want to go too much into the details of what we are done, and I rely on Javier and Miguel to do that more into detail. But one important activity was to select the standards that we would rely on to provide the proper interpretations of 17025. Here are the two ones we selected, and here are the domains of interpretations we handled into our documents. One important matter is that not only we provided interpretation that relates to what an ITSF should do to comply with the interpretation or to its accreditation criteria, but also we provided some recommendations from NAPs. At the very beginning, is where all combined in a single document, but based on the comments we received from you, and we thank you again for that, we decided to split the two parts. So the documents were already submitted to ECCG and EA for review. We have taken the comments into consideration, and this separation into the two documents is just one illustration of that. Sorry, and we will go deeper into the presentation after that. But so the question is the way forward. We have multiple options, and here is one option we had foreseen with my two colleagues Javier and Miguel. ENISA and the group in general is considering as a good way forward to submit these elements as a new work item for Sense and Elec TG17. But we are of course open to other options. You will tell us what works best, whether you would prefer based on the content of the element we provided, whether you would prefer to have a EEA giving recommendations to the NABs into whatever accreditation program you set, whether you prefer to have these elements in the scheme and then we ask the Commission to have this element in the scheme, or whether the way forward through standardization makes best sense. From an ENISA perspective, whatever works.
In order to protect the information of the evaluation. And second one is the technical competence of the personnel, mainly the personnel involved in the vulnerability analysis of the products. Well, as you know, in the Cybersecurity Act, there are three levels, three assurance levels: basic, substantial, and high. The basic one is not applicable on this scheme, but the substantial and high are applicable, but the requirements are different. The CAPs, the conformity assessment body working on a substantial level, need to be accredited, but the conformity assessment body that want to work at high level, they need to be accredited and also authorized by the national authority. For this reason, we need a very close cooperation among the national accreditation body and the national cybersecurity certification authority, because a close cooperation among them will be a benefit for everyone. First, for the laboratory, the ITSEC, because they don't need to be assessed twice for the same requirement. Second, for the NABs, the National Accreditation Body, because they will get support, they can find technical assessors from the National Cybersecurity Authority. And of course, it will be also useful for the National Cybersecurity Authority that if he relies on the work done by the NAB, they make have a less stressful process for the authorization. So this cooperation among accreditation and accreditation bodies and the authorities is a win-win-win. Everybody wins with this. Well, as Javier told you before, there is still a lot of work to be done on this group, because at the moment we are only working on the guidance and requirements for ITSEC at substantial level. Then we will need to work for that on the requirements for certification body at to substantial level, and then the same for high. So there is a lot of work ahead still. Well, additional requirements for the labs in this scheme, as it is until the moment, they will come from ISO standards and interpretation, European interpretation of this standard also. This has been explained, but I will to point out in this that this technical ISO TS 23532 Part 1, these have information security requirements for the labs, And in the past, it was the national scheme, the certification body, who assessed this requirement, and now is the accreditation body who will have to assess these information security requirements for ITSEF at level substantial. That is a change for the accreditation body who has been working in this field. Well, the scheme will be more than less like this. There is a client or developer with the products. The laboratory will evaluate these products according with this standard, and then the accreditation body will evaluate the laboratory according with all these standards, of course, the 17025, and the requirements coming from the scheme. And this requirement will be based on these other standards. This has been already told to you. And the same for the certification body. We expect to have, of course, the ISO 17065 and additional requirements for the certification body. Well, then let's speak about the guidance for NAPs. Miguel explained to you that there are recommendations for NAPs on assessors, on the knowledge that they need to have, on the possible sources where we can find these assessors, mainly from the National Cybersecurity Authority. But I would like to also stress that we may face additional problems when looking for assessors, practical problems. For instance, if we are going to assess a laboratory who has evaluate a product at high level, and this product is classified, the information about this product is classified, then you will need to use assessors that, apart from the knowledge, they need to have one specific habilitation to access the classified information. Maybe NATO clearance, security clearance, and this is only for information that we may have to think on additional things, practical things, not only on the knowledge and of the assessors. About the confidentiality, I also would like to stress that in this scheme, the requirements about the security of the information are quite strict, quite requiring. So we will have to face to keep the information at the same level that the ITSEF keep the information of the evaluation. So we have to be aware that on this particular field of information security, maybe that we need to take additional measures that we usually do. Well, I would like to say that we have a big help on the Cybersecurity Act on Article 58 that gives a mandate to the national authorities. They give them the mandate to actively assist and support the national accreditation bodies in the monitoring and supervision of the activities of the conformity assessment bodies. So they have this mandate. But also on the document it's been sent to you, the guidance for the national accreditation body. They give us some recommendation about how to work and how to cooperate among the national accreditation bodies and the national authorities. And this is very important, very crucial point, because as I told you before, it's not easy to find experts in this field. So if we can use experts coming from the National Cybersecurity Authority, or at least an expert that has been approved by them, that is a very fruitful for us. This is helpful because we can create a climate of cooperation, of mutual trust, and where there are transparency of the activities of the NAB are transparent for the national authority. And I would say, from my personal point of view and the NAC experience, that this is essential to make the scheme work. In ENAC, we start to work in this field more than 20 years ago. I remember that the first lab we evaluate, I was the team leader in that evaluation, and we create a team with members from the national authority and other members, and that was the beginning of the fruitful cooperation between our national authority and us and ENAC. And I recommend you, all of you, to do the same, to be transparent in your working, to offer then all the cooperation, and to know each other way of work, to know the persons involved in these activities, because this is a win-win-win for every of the conformity assessment, the accreditation bodies and the national authorities.